you seen this email before, sir? The last page, please.
No, sir, I don't recall.
Okay. So this email is from January 27, 2022 at 4:21 p.m. You can agree with me that the protesters in Ottawa didn't arrive here until the 28th. Is that fair?
That's my understanding, yes, sir.
All right. So they're already preparing the narrative that they're going to label the protesters with. Can you scroll down, please? And there I put this to the last witness as well. Our government recognizes and respects that everyone in Canada has the right to safe and peaceful protest. Threatening acts of violence and inciting hatred, as we have seen from a select few in recent days, is unacceptable and does not reflect the views of the majority of Canadians. We condemn all such hateful and violent rhetoric in strongest terms. So can you agree with me that that labeling of the protesters had already been set out on January 27th?
Sir, I don't know the context of this email or frankly, where it comes from.
Okay, if we can scroll up. Okay, scroll up to the top, please. So this is with your chief of staff, and they're agreeing about how they're going to set the narrative for the protest. And if you scroll down again, they confirm with one another that this is what they're going to do. So can you agree with me again that by January 27th, 2022, essentially all your colleagues and yourselves had agreed that there'd be a joint government response, and this was how you're going to deal with it. You were going to label the protesters violent, to incite hate, hateful, violent rhetoric. That was the intention on January 27th, correct?
No, sir, I disagree.
Okay.
There is no agreement here. It's recommendation from someone on staff.
Right. If we could bring up document ssm.can.00007719 underscore rel.0001. So, sir, I can tell you these are the notes of Miss Sarah Jackson. I take it you know Sarah Jackson is the office manager to the Chief of Staff of the Prime Minister. Is that correct?
I know of her. I don't believe we've met face-to-face.
Right. And you know who Katie Telford is?
Yes, sir.
And she's the Chief of Staff to the Prime Minister?
Yes, sir.
All right. Can we scroll down to page 3, please? All right. So you'll see that this note, it's the notes from Ms. Jackson. It says February 4th, KT call. So I'm sure you can agree with me that KT, that's Katie Telford. Is that correct?
I have no idea, sir.
Okay. So let's scroll down to page 4, please. And there at the note on February 4th, 2022, it says Blair Strategy Emergency Act. You see that?
Yes, sir, I see it.
Yeah, because it was your strategy on February 4th, 2022 to get the Emergencies Act invoked, was it not?
No, sir, that's incorrect.
So why would, in a conversation, to your knowledge, why would Ms. Jackson record that in a meeting with Ms. Telford? Why would she do that, to your knowledge?
I have no idea, sir. I can tell you I recall the meeting in which I talked about the need for the police of jurisdiction to exhaust their existing authorities and that we needed to support them. I also made it very clear to colleagues that the Emergency Act was a measure of last resort and not appropriate at this time. That was right. The conversation I had in the 4th.
And can you agree with me, though, that if there was a strategy to invoke the Emergencies Act, that if the purported emergency resolves itself on its own, of course, there's no reason to invoke it, correct?
Again, sir, there was no strategy to invoke the Act. There was a discussion among colleagues about the various options that were available, and I was very explicit to my colleagues that the Emergency Act was not under consideration at this time. And that was on February 4th.
But you had said on Global News on the 13th, at 8 o'clock on the 13th, you had told them, and I have the transcript if you'd like me to repeat it, you said that the Emergencies Act was under consideration from the outset. Do you want me to read the transcript to you?
To be really clear, I believe what I said is, and you can read whatever you like, by the way, but what I believe I said is everything was on the table and we were considering every option throughout. That is the responsibility of those of us.
Sir, what you actually said was that it was under consideration from the first day. That's what you said. Would you like me to show you the transcript?
That might be useful.
Okay. If we could bring up the support documents, it, I believe, is in there.
You're referring to HRF 401622, right, Council?
Yes, sir.
Well, do we have the actual reference? Maybe your associate can tell us what the reference is in the database.
Well, I don't want to slow this down, so I'll move on and come back to that. So, sir, we'll come back to what you said. But by February 4th of 2022, you agree that the Prime Minister and Cabinet?
That's correct.
Right. So what was your response here?
I don't recall.
You don't recall. Would it be helpful to the commission if we had your response?
I don't know because I don't know. I don't recall the response.
You don't recall the response? But given that it's an engagement proposal and in the meeting when you actually had it before you, there's notes to the effect that this isn't action, we want action. Is it fair to say that both yourselves, including the Prime Minister and Minister Mendocino, you were never on any terms going to carry out any such proposal that would essentially require you to go and talk to the protesters? Were you?
No, sir. I don't agree with anything you've just said.
So you had always been open to meeting with the protesters?
We were, and Deputy Stewart had advised that he was involved in a process of engagement with the protesters. But I frankly, I was not in favor of having senior ministers of government go out and engage with the protesters. In my experience, that's done at an officials level and not involving cabinet ministers, or certainly not the Prime Minister.
But right now, as I understand it, and there has been testimony that it's not uncommon for law enforcement to request of the political branch to assist in a negotiation like that. It's actually relatively common. They testified to that. So what was the problem? Was it because you couldn't be seen to meet with Nazis and extremists? Is that what was the issue?
First of all, I disagree with the characterization you've just provided, but I'm not. I don't have any experience in the many years I've dealt with public order events of engaging with political figures to engage with protesters.
Okay, can we please bring up one last document, ssm.can.00008763_rel.0001.
And you're over your time, so I hope that's the
Yes.
last. Okay, thanks.
This is a copy of the proposal with respect to engaging the protesters. Okay? Minister, what's the problem with it?
Could I see the whole thing?
Absolutely.
Great. And again, I did not express a problem with this. The Deputy Minister was engaging with city and provincial officials in this, and then came with his proposal to.
Sir, this proposal was before you in the IRG on the 13th.
Actually, I appreciate you bringing that up, sir. I also recall that in the discussion, almost immediately after Deputy Minister Stewart advised us of the discussions that had been taking place, there was very public disagreement among a number of people in the protest who disavowed this process. And so, quite frankly, I think that had an impact on our consideration.
I understand that, but that's not really what the evidence that's come out. There's been evidence, and we'll leave it at that. But at the end of the day, when you saw this, you agreed that it was recommended by the OPP, it had been brought to you and drafted by the Deputy Minister of Public Safety, and they were on board. In fact, I found an email. Can you agree that the Privy Councillor clerk, she gave it the green light?
Again, I have no knowledge of that, sir.
It was cabinet, was it not?
Well,
There was no recommendation. There
Mr.
was-
Commissioner, I think that misstates the evidence
Yeah.
of the clerk with
So,
respect to the
just-
green light
just
claim that my
one-
friend has made. I'd like to ask that my friend have a good faith basis for the questions put and the characterizations of the evidence that are placed before the witness. As some of the characterizations suggest that there's a purpose to the questions, less of seeking the witness's evidence, but a purpose of stating facts as though they were evidence when that
Right.
evidence is not
And
properly
I have
before you.
one last question and I'm done. So you agree with me that after the invocation, on numerous occasions, your government told the public that law enforcement had told you that the threshold to invoke the Emergencies Act was met. Do you remember all those statements that your colleagues and maybe even yourself made? Do you remember those?
to be very clear, sir, I do not agree with you.
Okay, so you don't agree that those statements were made?
I don't agree with what you've said.
Okay, so you don't agree that ministers in your government have said that law enforcement advised cabinet that the threshold to invoke the Emergencies Act was met?
And again, sir, the question you put to me, I do not agree with.
Okay, but then you do agree, of course, is that law enforcement never advised you that the threshold to invoke the Emergencies Act was met, did they?
Frankly, it was never a question I put to law enforcement. I don't think that would have been appropriate.
Okay, thank you.